Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us as we get ever closer to the November 8th general election. And I've been pretty busy interviewing local candidates, legislative and other candidates in contested races. Happy to have an official statewide candidate with us today, Mike Pieciak, the Democratic candidate for State Treasurer. Mike, thanks for the time. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm sure it's probably I can probably say this more easily than yourself, but you do have an opponent for the record.
Yes, I do.
November 8th, H. Brooke Page.
Yes.
Certainly a familiar name to me. I've never met him. And for the record, he's running for Secretary of State also, and I believe
correct.
in the primary was jumped into 5 races, I think in the
correct.
primary.
Yeah.
So I guess he's down to 2.
Yes.
And I know that'll be a tough decision for him to pick which one. But anyway, you are obviously a heavy favorite in this race. But anyway, give us some back. I guess I should note, people seeing you now, I'm sure everybody's probably recognizing you. You certainly became pretty much a household name, I would think, in Vermont with all the governor's press conferences during the pandemic. But and again, at that point, you were director of Department of Financial Regulation?
Yeah, exactly right.
And you've stepped down from that now and running for state treasurer. But yeah, give us some background.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'd be happy to. So as I was mentioning to you, Richard, I grew up in Brattleboro.
Good. I like Brattleboro. Not there much, but it's a train stop when I'm on the train.
Yeah, exactly.
Got some life to it.
I mean, it's like, I think there's a lot of similarities to St. Albans in terms of growing up in Brattleboro. Yeah. Like, you're in a small town. You're going to see the people that you're interacting with at school the next day, at church, or the next day at work. So when you grow up in that small town environment, I think it really instills certain values and ways that you conduct yourself, right? And I think a lot of people have that experience across Vermont. It also has a real strong community, like a lot of our communities do in Vermont. And my parents were very involved in that community. My dad is a CPA. He has a CPA firm down there in Brattleboro. He just turned 79, and he's still working as hard as he ever has worked.
That's impressive.
So he, and he was always just very generous with his time and what he did for the community. As a little kid growing up, I saw him working to build lights at the football field.
Wow.
Raising money to expand the golf course, raising money and being on the teen center board. So all those kind of like Chamber of Commerce type leadership roles was really, what he was really passionate about. And I asked him, why did you commit so much time to doing these things? They take you away from your professional occupation and obviously the sacrifice in terms of being at home and things like that. And he just said that, Brattleboro had given him so much and had given our family so much that it was the least that he could do to give back in that way. And just as a kid, that was pretty impactful.
That's really impressive to hear that.
And my mom, she, equally impressive in a different sort of way. She founded a soup kitchen when she was pregnant with me 39 years ago.
Really?
And she's still the director at the soup kitchen today.
Wow.
And
I'm afraid she's probably getting a lot of business these days.
Yeah, so I remember when I was a kid and I would go there with her, maybe they'd have 30 or 40 people, in a particular day. And now it's over 100 people, and they have a lot of people taking food away. And so there's a lot more demand, unfortunately, now than back in the 80s and 90s. But so maybe if you could guess, my mom in terms of the social justice and my dad in terms of the Chamber of Commerce, they come from different political ideologies. My dad's a Republican, my mom is a Democrat.
Interesting.
So I like to say that bipartisanship is in my DNA. In terms of being able to listen, engage, and then ultimately recognize that politics is only a piece of our existence in our lives, and at the end of the day, we need to remember that and still be able to form relationships and friendships with people that think differently than us.
Interesting. Of course, Brattleboro, that's Peter Shumlin's kind of neck of the woods. And did that hook into you getting into state government? You knew Peter early on, I suspect? So
Peter Shumlin, Governor Shumlin said that he remembers when I was born. So I don't, I can't verify that or not, but he could, that's what he says. And he, was from Putney, just up the road, and somebody that was very engaged in the local community. And when I went away for law school out of state and I was working in New York City, Governor Shumlin was the governor, and there was a job in state government that opened up, and the commissioner reached out to me about whether I'd be interested in coming back to Vermont to fill it. And I was interested in coming back to Vermont. It was just a matter of timing and all of that. I was just 30 years old, and I jumped at the opportunity and was the deputy commissioner at the Department of Financial Regulation for a little over 2 years. And then Governor Shumlin appointed me commissioner toward the end of his administration.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
And sounds like you get along pretty well with Governor Phil Scott. Again, certainly a key part of his, thrice weekly for a while. The talk about must-see television for a lot of folks in Vermont.
Yeah.
But
well,
interesting.
I think, Richard, it goes back to what I was saying, that trend, that bipartisanship in your DNA, having parents that viewed things very differently politically, but seeing them being married to each other for decades. Having both of them having friends that had different political persuasions, but being friends with them for decades, it just allowed you to really focus on, particularly in like Vermont, where we're just, we're trying to solve problems, we're trying to help people, and I don't think that many of the challenges that we face in our state don't have to be approached from an ideological standpoint. It's really, how do you create the most good? How do you help the most people? How do you solve problems? And I think if you I'm a proud Democrat. I'm not saying that, but I think when you get into office, you need to take that sort of viewpoint of helping people, solving problems, and putting your ideology sort of over to the side.
Sounds like it'd be nice if everybody had that mindset, but that sounds great. So Beth Pierce, who I've met just a couple times, but sounds like Beth gets very good words as a very solid treasurer, ran into some health issues. And did she encourage you? Is that easy for you to think about running for, and indeed, did she kind of try to recruit you, or did recruit you?
Yeah, so, you mentioned those weekly press conferences and COVID-19, so, that was my existence for the 2 years leading up to the decision to run. Yeah. So Beth mentioned to me that, last couple of elections, she was sort of thinking about potentially not running again, and she continued to run, and she didn't know about this election, but it was a possibility that she might not run. So I knew that she had been thinking about, potentially retirement, and unfortunately she had the cancer diagnosis in April that kind of finalized that decision for her. She's doing very well, and she's working very hard, getting the most out of.
Obviously, still our treasurer.
Yeah, and she's doing a lot of great work these last few months as she works to transition, hopefully, to me, but transition to a new treasurer.
But that's cool. But she made it clear that she wanted you to be her successor.
Yeah, and that was, so there were two thoughts there. One was, boy, these last 2 years with COVID have been, it's been a lot of work. I was sort of looking to take a breath. But at the same time, it's hard to go back to something you were doing after having an experience like that. I think you see that in a lot of people's lives. It was a moment where people stopped and reflected and said, maybe it's time to do something different or move somewhere different. So I was ready for a new challenge after I thought about it for a little bit. And I was incredibly honored that Beth Pierce, would suggest to me that I consider doing it. I hold great regard for Beth, and as a person, as a politician, and as a public servant as well. So it was really, really meaningful for me and powerful to have her support on the day that I announced. She came to my announcement with me, introduced me, and endorsed me right off the bat. So that was huge for me as a first-time candidate, to have that kind of wind in my sails.
And had you ever run for anything before, like school board, select board, anything like that?
So they asked me that at the announcement, and I said, I think, I ran for sixth grade class president.
Really?
And,
so you're more than that.
They asked me if I won as well. So.
And of course, didn't run into, I guess with her endorsement, didn't have any primary opponent or anything. I guess maybe who were backing you scared anybody. Did you hear, were there other names you were hearing of candidates who might run or not really?
Yeah, I think for every office that opens up statewide, I mean, in Vermont we have such a tradition of backing incumbents. That
really, good luck beating an incumbent.
Yeah.
Like the last governor, Jeffrey Keyser, over half a century, even before I
1962.
62.
So I think if you're, interested in politics, and I think treasurer's a great job because it's like, if you have a financial background, if you have a business background, if you're interested in helping solve our economic challenges, it's really an appealing position, I think, for a lot of people. So there were certainly, discussions and names, but this entire campaign, even now, you mentioned Brooke Page, but, we are focusing on getting out and meeting with Vermonters, getting our message out there, working as hard as we can till November 8th. And really, we did that right off the bat. We kind of ignored all of the chat about, who might do what, and stuck to what we knew we were going to do. And I think it served us well in the campaign.
Have you had some debates with Mr.
I think
Page?
we have something coming up, but we haven't had any yet. they've been focused on the governor's race, the Senate race, the media, I mean, and the congressional race. So a lot of those races have been getting their debate schedule set up, and they haven't gotten to the treasurer's office yet.
Yeah, it sure seems like this is, as my observer point of view, I mean, the primaries seem to be the key election. I mean, it just seems like, to my view, or I think most people's view, there's not much suspense about the statewide races in November.
Yeah.
I thought Lieutenant Governor might have some suspense. I'm not even sure of that, but obviously they're local races. But hey, good for you. So what is your message? Have you got a succinct message you give folks about becoming, hopefully from your point of view, the next treasurer?
So, one of the things that we did when we announced, after we learned we wouldn't have a primary, is we said that we have a really unique opportunity here. So let's explore how we can run our campaign a little differently than if we did have a competitive primary. And what we decided to do was embark on a 251 at the time town tour.
Now up to 252?
Now up to 252.
With what, Essex Junction?
Yeah, the city of Essex Junction.
Okay.
So that was our goal. We're over 170 towns visited.
Really?
And
I'm curious. I've got a beautiful camp. I'm a half owner of a camp in beautiful Averill, Vermont, on Little Averill. Yeah. Have you made it out to that beautiful part of Essex County? Or
Averill will be either October 18th or October 25th. We're going to be up in the Kingdom 3 different times over the next 3 weeks, but we'll get up there. I know. I think it's April's Maples in April.
Fact, it's funny you mentioned that. I had a great food there just a couple days ago.
Nice.
That's a great place, and I'll also recommend another place while I've got you. Shea Pigeon.
Okay.
Is just also very close to there.
All right.
And Pigeon's a wonderful lady. She's an older lady. I use the word older advisedly. It just works so hard, but it's a good place. You'll go by it on Route 114.
Right.
So
nice.
Keep in mind Shea Pigeon also.
Shea Pigeon, great. So I've been to Averill before, but the plan is to visit all the towns during the campaign.
And you'll pull that off, you think?
Yes, for sure.
Pull that off.
Yeah, and we're ending in Victory, Vermont.
Wow.
So the symbolic nature of ending in victory.
Yeah.
So we call it the Road to Victory tour. And,
that's cool.
But the reason I mention that is because you asked what the pitch is, and part of it is listening to what's happening in our communities. Yeah. And I had a sense of the 3 issues I wanted to talk about, or I thought that Montpelier should be focused on. Yeah. But it's been reinforcing as I've gotten around the state. And number one, beyond any issue, is housing. You hear that in every region. You hear that in every town. Yeah. You hear it in Brattleboro because people have moved to Brattleboro from Boston or New York or Connecticut. Yeah. They have the ability now to work and live in 2 different places. Yeah. So they've come to Brattleboro with their jobs. They've taken a house. They have a higher paying job, so we're paying more taxes, but they're also taking a house without adding to the local workforce. So it's putting more pressure on the local workforce. You're hearing that in resort towns like in Stratton and Dover and Stowe. Yeah. You're hearing it Manchester, the Upper Valley, Burlington, certainly. The hospital having a hard time finding employees because their employees can't find housing.
Yeah, sounds like a huge issue.
Beta Technology wanting to hire hundreds of more people, but
which will have a presence right here in St. Albans town,
which is great. Yeah, and St. Albans is doing a lot of great work in that regard. But I think the answer to the housing problem is to have more downtown dense housing. I know you already have a housing project that was recently completed with some affordable housing, and it's a market rate housing. Yeah. And there's another big
project down on Lake Street proposed. But yeah, St. Albans is probably doing a lot better than a lot of other places.
Yeah, and that's the answer, I think, is we need more downtown dense housing. And it ties into the last point that I'll make, but just to get to the middle point, because it ties in so well with housing, is childcare, the availability and the affordability of childcare. Yeah. So in the same way that a school district or a Beta Technology or any employer, hospital, is having a hard time finding employees because those employees can't find housing, they're equally having a hard time finding employees because their employees can't find affordable childcare or childcare at all. Yeah. So that's a real issue for us to solve, both for families and also for our economy. If we really focus just on those 2 issues, housing and childcare, I think we could make so much economic progress, really unleash the full potential of the Vermont economy, and also benefit working families in Vermont as well.
And as state treasurer, you obviously see a role in that. Do you think those are issues you can deal with and help out with?
Yeah, absolutely. When the rating agencies, one of the primary roles of the treasurer's office is to work with the rating agencies to make sure that we have, when we do take on debt and do bonding, that we're getting the lowest interest rate possible, so we can make those important investments at a low cost. And when the rating agencies look at Vermont, they talk about our unfunded pension liability, which we've talked a lot about the last 2 years.
Which was on my list, yeah, for sure.
And then they say demographics. right? You're getting older, Vermont, and your workforce is getting smaller. So how do we solve that problem? It's through more housing that's affordable for working families, and it's for more childcare so that more working families can come here, afford to be here, and work jobs that we need desperately, teachers in the hospitals, in our private sector economy as well. And then think about the thing that's really interesting to think about in terms of that's the economic argument for the state, sort of in a macro level, but there's also an economic argument for each individual family. The estimate when you are a parent coming out of the workforce to take care of a child from age 0 to 5, mostly the female spouse is, predominantly who comes out of the workforce. You've lost 5 years of earning potential, and that's assuming you only have one child, right? But you've lost 5 years of earning potential, so you've lost 5 years of income. When you go back into the workforce, you're making a much lower salary in year 6 than you would have been making had you been in the workforce that whole time. And you aren't able to save any money for retirement because you're not making any money. So your money is not earning interest, it's not earning investment returns. So if you add up all of that lost and think about it over somebody's career and into their retirement, it adds up to $430,000 lost in somebody's retirement savings.
Really?
So not only does it impact our economy now, not only is it impacting those families now, but it has long-term consequences as people look to retire and stay in Vermont. So it really is an issue that obviously would benefit the children, benefit the families, but really benefit our economy. So making it easier to open child care centers, particularly in a rural part of our state, whether that's through state support, but also making sure maybe we have additional subsidies for families so that they're not paying an exorbitant amount of their income on child care.
And those are again, as state treasurer, I guess I wouldn't be thinking, not that I've thought too much about state treasurer, but it sounds like kind of more gubernatorial issues. But as state treasurer, those are issues you can deal with.
Well, they tie back to those demographic issues,
Okay.
right? So if you're charged with, if the rating agencies are saying these are the 2 things we think you need to work on, you got to lean into them and figure out how to help solve them. Now, the treasurer's office might not have all the levers or even just a few of the levers, but you need to be able to work with the governor, with the legislature, to advocate for economic policies that will drive that kind of demographic growth that we want to see. Younger families, younger children in our schools, more working age people in Vermont. So, it is something that I think everyone in Montpelier, whether you're the governor, a legislator, a secretary of state, whatever position you're in, I think we all have an obligation to think, how can we help on those economic issues and on those demographic issues.
And seemingly a big plus for you. It sounds like you get along with Governor Phil Scott pretty well. Governor, of course, a very heavy favorite to be reelected. So, it sounds like you have a very solid relationship with the governor.
Yeah, the governor set a good example in terms of politics and then policy. So he made it very clear always when he was done with his campaign that was politics and now that's over and then now it's on to policy, right? And so I think it's just a good approach when you're, again, trying to solve problems and help people. Then you're willing to work with anyone that has a good idea or anyone that's trying to, move Vermont forward. And I think housing and childcare are on the top of both the governor's agenda and the legislative's agenda.
Boy, interesting election statewide. Again, it seems like there's no suspense to me about any of the elections for the statewide offices. But boy, talk about a changeover. Usually, as you say, incumbents usually keep winning, but an amazing number of changes to about much of state government changing.
Yeah.
With the personnel.
And not just statewide, but at the legislative level too.
Good point. Boy,
yeah.
about a third. Sounds like about a third of a turnover in the legislature.
Yeah.
Certainly a few changes coming up in Franklin County too.
Bill Lippert. I don't know if you know Representative Lippert from Heinsberg.
I've met him a state rep for maybe 30, 40 years or something. And he's retiring.
He's retiring, and he came to our campaign kickoff, and I had to point out to him. I hadn't told him this before. I served with him
Democrat from Heinsberg.
Democrat from Heinsberg, and very important in the gay rights movement in Vermont.
Right.
And I told him when I saw him at our announcement, I had to call him out when I was on the stage, and I said, "Bill, you might not remember this, but I was a page when you were a legislator, back in the day, and it's really you were a leader then, and you're a voice of reason and leader now, and we'll miss you in Montpelier." But people like him that is really a changing of the guard in terms of new voices and new perspectives. So, like anything, obviously we're going to lose a tremendous amount of experience, and we're going to lose a lot of competent people. But there's also an opportunity to have a new perspective and a new sort of generation of leaders in Montpelier. So I'm really excited about that overall.
And Vermont finally, it took a while, Vermont finally about to send, again, Becca Balint, of course, a heavy favorite to say the least in a race for U.S. House. Finally, Vermont will elect a woman to Congress, seemingly.
Yeah, it seems to be
all indications.
About time, I guess. I think it's what most people say and what I hear around the state. But
about time.
Yeah, but we have a small delegation, and when
that's
people get
Vermont
elected,
does get beat up. Yeah, there's no smaller delegation than Vermont's 3-member delegation, so that's the point. But yeah, it
and
seems
incumbents
like it's about
don't
time.
lose. So when you get in, so but it's about time.
I guess you could tell that to Peter Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, funny politics is funny. Bernie wins his mayoral race by 10 votes, and then upsets an incumbent. The rest is history.
The rest is history. If it shows you how important it is to vote, right?
Yeah.
10 votes determined a lot of things, not just in Vermont and in Senator Sanders' career,
for sure,
but nationally as well.
In fact, I ran into something. I interviewed we have 3 candidates here for Franklin County Assistant or Side Judge.
Oh, yeah.
And Josh Aldrich is one of the 2 Republican candidates from Sheldon.
Yep.
Run for the position before, but he ran as a write-in candidate. And Kelly Goslin's the Democratic incumbent, longtime side judge, and Jay Sweeney, longtime Sheriff's Department member up here. Anyway, got the Republican nomination and the second Democratic nomination. Josh Aldrich beat Kelly Goslin on the Republican side, write-in votes by literally by 1 vote.
Oh, really?
So
well, that was the recount that was up here.
I'm not. I guess
Maybe they did.
I guess it was. Anyway, but one vote. So yeah. So I love people who say, my vote doesn't matter. Yeah, you never know. Mike, let me ask you about the Jay Peak situation. Yeah. Huge news up here, obviously, and seemingly very good news with the sale to the Pacific, whatever the company is.
Yeah.
But again, the EB5 scandal, obviously a huge story. And the Shumlin administration caught some flack about that, as maybe you did. Again, you were deputy commissioner. And again, I think you've reacted strongly. I think I've seen some criticism, at least of the Shumlin folks. But again, unfair criticism. I guess the criticism was, shouldn't state government have been onto that,
right.
Aware of that earlier? You want to get into that just a little
sure.
bit?
It's interesting.
It's a big story up here, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
We got about 6 minutes left.
I'll do my best to fit it in this.
I realize you could talk about that for hours, probably.
But, I think whenever you handle something that's really challenging and complex and politically sensitive and, all wrapped up into one, there's always going to be criticism from folks. It doesn't matter if it's JPEAK or if it's COVID-19 or if it's working on the pension system. You're always going to get that kind of response. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Now, in terms of, my role, I like to remind folks, when the program was created here in Vermont, I think I was in high school. When the first project was approved, really? I think I was in college. Wow. When the fraud started, I was in law school. So this predates, a lot of people, a lot of, just from my own personal experience and a lot of administrations. It goes back a long time. Yeah. So when I came back to Vermont, it was in February 2014. Okay. 10 months later, we were in it in terms of looking at JPEAK.
And again, you were the deputy director of Department of Financial.
Yeah.
Who was the director then?
The commissioner was Susan Donegan, and she'd been there for a number of years.
Okay.
But I came on to work on issues relating to small business. We wanted to help businesses be able to raise money from Vermonters in the way that Ben & Jerry's did decades ago. Yeah. That was our focus, but the governor asked if our department would take over the oversight of JPEAK and the EB5 projects broadly. So that was 6 or 7 months in that he asked us to do that. Yeah. We got an MOU in place with ACCD, the Commerce Department. They asked if I would help look at the ANC Bio project, and this is in January of 2015.
And I go through Newport on my way to camp. I go through Newport every couple of weeks or so.
So, we got really smart on that. I did a lot of research, and we had a meeting with them in late January, and we had a list of questions for them, and many of them were answered satisfactorily. They weren't important questions, but there were 3 that really stood out. One, I said, how much interaction have you had with the SEC? Because I've heard that the SEC is doing depositions, and they said, haven't heard from them in a long time, and when we do, it's pretty perfunctory. I called the SEC the next day, and they told a very different story. Really? So that was a red flag for us, obviously.
So that was kind of the first major red flag that popped up?
Yeah. They also said, we had a couple of financial sheets that had been given to us, and I said, why do you have this margin loan on this account? And they said, explanation that I didn't really understand. And they said they'd follow up with the documents and a full explanation. And when they followed up with the explanation a month later, it was a different one than the one they had told us at the meeting, and they didn't have any of the documents.
Wow.
So that's really what spurred us, and we ended up issuing dozens and dozens and dozens of subpoenas. 100,000 pages of financial documents we reviewed.
Yeah, I've seen figures like that. That's unbelievable.
So we just, I'm proud of the work that we did to uncover it. We were working hand in glove with the SEC. We were working hand in glove with the FBI to help them with their cases too. The FBI, I don't fault the SEC or the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office. The SEC worked on that case for 3+ years.
Really?
The U.S. Attorney's Office worked in that case for 4+ years.
Wow.
In Vermont, it took us about 12 to 13 months to bring our investigation from zero to complete and bring the case as well. So we really were working at light speed for something like this.
Right.
And right until the end, we didn't have all of the information we needed to 100% prove what had happened. Once we had that and we were able to show it in court, then we were off and running with the SEC to bring it close to that.
Well, I guess the good news is, again, are you, from what you know about the sale, does it sound like a decent firm that bought it and stuff? I mean, it sounds like the future looks like it's pretty solid now.
Well, that's the other thing, right?
And it sounds like the federal receiver, who I know, Michael Goldberg, sounds like pretty solid.
He's a great guy, yeah. We worked very closely together.
Just from reporting and stuff, he struck me, it sounded like he was doing a pretty good job.
I mean, within 1 year, the exact anniversary of the filing of our case, bringing a $150 million settlement with Raymond James that paid all the contractors, paid all the debt, really put the resort and the investors in a really strong position. It enabled them to eventually sell the resort. And the thing that, obviously, from Vermont, the thing we care about is...
Unfortunately, down to about a minute and a half here.
Sure.
Sorry to get...
No, it's all... You just care, you want to protect those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs at JP. You want to make sure it's an employer that's going to care about the community, care about building out the resort further. And it seems like they found a good partner in making this sale. So that is what we cared about. The dollar price, that was obviously important because that's going to go back to the investors. But it's pretty remarkable that all of that happened, but we were able to preserve that asset, able to preserve all those jobs, and that resort is going to continue to benefit Jay and the much broader Northeast Kingdom and Franklin County regions for decades to come.
For sure. Well, it sounds like a happy ending to a pretty tough story.
Absolutely right.
Interesting. Down to about 45 seconds. How about a closing statement? Sounds like you're pretty psyched to be the next state treasurer.
Yeah, exactly right, Richard. I'm really excited. I mean, I think our state has a real opportunity over the next couple of decades to transform Vermont, have an economy that's working for people that live here in Vermont. We have vibrant communities in every corner of our state. We have the right policies. If we think about it strategically, I think we have a very bright future. And that's why I want to get involved in elected office, and that's why I want to get involved in the treasurer's office as well.
Very good. Mike Pieciak, state treasurer, Democratic candidate. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And thanks to my man Paul Snyder out there for doing all the hard work. I'm Richard Cowperthwait. Thanks for joining us on Northwest Access TV. See you next time.